Monsters in the closet! Mom! Mom! Ah! Ah! What is it? What is it? Did you get a bee? No! No! There's monsters in the closet! There are? Did you see them? No! What do they look like? I don't know, but they're gonna get me. That's normal when you're little. And Mom! Yeah, it's okay. What if one of them looks like a bee? What if it's a good school-eating monster? What if it's a monster that's gonna make me poor the rest of my life? What if it's a monster that's gonna follow me around for 20 years? What if it's gonna be a monster that's gonna bring shame to you, Mom and Dad? What if it's an embarrassment monster? What if it's a low stratification monster? And your parents will say, but we always have our Mercedes-Benz.
I am Bernice Kaplan, Alan Kaplan's mother. I have, besides Alan, his sister Shirlene. And unfortunately, it was just, a very small family. We had to wait for him a long time. We couldn't get pregnant right away. And our genius was born. Believe it or not, he walked at 9 months. And he was an active child, always. He wasn't a kind of a youngster who would sit and play with a toy for any length of time. If he wasn't moving, he wasn't happy. And about 7 years old, he joined a mini Little League team. His father was so proud because he could play any position. He played court, he played first base, he played outfield, he played wherever they put him. And he stayed with it for several years until he was about 12, 13 years old. There was one time in 4th grade, I believe it was, when I got a message from this teacher. I went up to school with Alan to find out what the problem was because he never was a problem in school. And what was the problem? Alan was not making use of his free time. And I said, well, what is he supposed to be doing during his free time? And he says, well, we have a bookcase here full of books, and he doesn't pick a book to read. And I said, Alan, why don't you pick a book to read? He says, because they don't have the books I want to read. He didn't like children's books. He wanted historical books. He read about wars and history also. And childish things were not for him. When he was in high school, he played tennis. He was self-taught. When the term ended and the tennis group were getting together to buy a present for the coach, Alan refused. He says, he didn't do anything for me. He says, I'm not contributing any money. So they said, well, you're going to sign the card? He says, yeah, I'll sign the card. But I'm not contributing. Does it sound familiar? His personality was set very early. And he stood by it. He signed the card. He went to the party for the cook, but he would not contribute to the present. Alan was so single-minded. He knew what he wanted. And he thought the whole world would succumb to whatever his decisions were. He did not want to go to Hebrew school. We compromised. We let him play baseball if he would go to Hebrew school. So he went to Hebrew school in his baseball uniform. And we got Alan up to the bar mitzvah. Not easily, but we made it. And at the bar mitzvah itself, at the ceremony, Alan was reading from the Torah. He finished reading a portion of it. He came and sat down next to his father and he says, I'm not going back up there. His mind was made up. His father says to him, and I'm sitting on the other side of my husband, and I'm listening to all this. And my husband says to him, if you make your mother cry on this day that's supposed to be a happy day for her, I will never, never forgive you. I will make your life miserable. Alan went back up on the stage and got through the bar mitzvah and had a good time at the party afterwards. And we got through that. He was a tough kid. And I, as a mother, had a tough time with him. We argued a lot. One of us, actually he could out-talk me, so actually I was the one who would give in somewhat or try and find a common ground there somewhere. And he moved out of the house. He went into college not knowing what he wanted to do. He didn't have a goal other than to get some sort of a general education. And I can't remember how it came about, but he got an internship with a psychologist whose clientele or patient list consisted of men who were beating their wives. And Alan stayed there and was very good. He was conducting his own groups. He was still at school. And he came to us and he said that he decided he's going to become a teacher. I did ask him why. Why did you decide on teaching? And he said, I just think I'll be a good teacher. That was his answer. I knew very little about Alan as a school teacher. He kept that part of his life separate, which I found out after his death.
I wanted to start out by kind of getting your story on what led up to you meeting Kaplan and kind of starting to get involved with him.
Well, we had a mutual friend, a guy named Don Musselwhite, and I guess Don was having a party and Alan showed up. So this is before he came here. So we actually had some conversations and knew each other a little bit. And then, that he got the job here. So that was interesting, like, oh, I know you, So he came here and he still was, I think, a little lost. But we hit it off and we recognized each other, a lot of intellectual compatibility, not that we thought the same, but that we're interested, excited about the same stuff.
Sure.
When I first got here, I knew almost nothing about this faculty, so it was all a surprise being in this hallway, walking by his room on the way to the restroom, while he was teaching, and his arms would be flapping and he would be speaking very loudly and passionately about some subject.
The story came to him. There's all this stuff going on in Hamilton. Actually, Hamilton had been in the LA Times, had been in the news about this kind of controversy going on that was racial. There was a Mr. Kaplan involved and Mr. Baton. But I read the Times stories and I was still confused about what was going on. And my friend Howard had gotten a call from, I think it was Mr. Baton, who had gotten, long story, but he was one of the figures in the controversy. He was trying to get some coverage, and Howard covered education, but Howard was busy. So he said to me, look, there's this thing going on in Hamilton. It's got all these issues I think you'd be interested in, and you have time, can you go down there? And I said, oh, Mr. Kaplan. I actually knew who he was. I never met him, but my younger sister had been in Humanities Magnet in the early 80s. So she was actually one of the first graduates of the Magnet. So when she was going there, I remember her talking about this very memorable teacher, Mr. Kaplan. She kind of complained about him, or she had her run-ins with him. So his name just stuck in my head. And so when this came up at the weekly, I went, oh, that's Mr. Kaplan. So I was very curious to meet this guy who I had heard about back when I was, I was a graduate student. But my sister kind of had, kind of seared his name into my memory. And I knew that he was racially controversial, but I didn't know all the particulars. So I was very curious when this came up. I wanted to kind of really find out who he was. So the first person I actually interviewed about him was my sister.
By accident or God, it was by design. Your parents let it happen.
Back then, the humanities had no ninth grade, so it was 10th, 11th, 12th. So 10th grade was Introduction to Social Studies. And the schedule was such that we could spend our conference period with the other guy's class. So I think there were 2 classes, and we basically team taught the whole year. We did that for a while, a couple years after that. So what team teaching between us really was, we said, okay, we're going to cover X topic. This is something we're going to deal with. And we kind of, because we were simpatico intellectually, didn't have to discuss it a lot. And we just sort of start the class and start talking and bouncing off each other, sort of like I'd say something, he'd say something, it'd go this way, go back to the student would say something, and we were just like that all the time. So that was really wonderful. And really, I think, if to the extent that we were part of establishing what the humanities magnet was, at least in the social sciences, that set the stage.
Sure.
Because we kind of gave each other license to go off the reservation, or outside the box, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Now later on, we expanded, and we basically lost the 10th grade, and that was the end of that collaboration. Our collaboration instruction for the next 30 years, whatever it was, 28 years, mostly consisted of, I found this article, or you're teaching this thing, or I found this other thing that'll help you, or you'll go back and forth. It was far more often me bringing things to him. 9 out of 10 times it's me bringing things to him. So there was that kind of collaboration, but it wasn't collaboration in instruction. And I think his style was much more consistent over the years, and I tended to be moving around stylistically a lot more, I think.
Sure.
Part of what was going on, we decided we needed to address a problem. 40% of the student population is white, 60% is minority, and in the 80s that was mostly black. So over the years those demographics have switched around. And the black students there was an academic gap. There was we would call it a test score gap. There was an obvious academic gap. And we wanted to address that head on. Now here you have 2 white Jewish teachers, Culver City, the Valley, we're like unlikely, characters to do this. We had to kind of come up with an approach that we thought would work. And so it basically came down to this. It was kind of psychological. You think of the phrase, the truth will set you free. So if you understand the reality around you in much more concrete terms, intellectual terms, it might give you some of the tools with which to deal with the emotional situation you find yourself in that might be holding you back. Mm-hmm. And much to our joy even, we found that a lot of our students, it was really working. They felt it was liberating. No one had told them, no one had talked to them about these things. No one had really discussed these things concretely. So the students who figured out that this was part of our history and part of how racism worked as an ideology, it was liberating for them. For others, it was oppressive. Okay, so that's kind of background. So what happened is some of the students, or their parents, who thought it was oppressive, got very upset.
The problem grew out of a class he was teaching in the homeschool. It was a U.S. history class. It was not Humanities magnet students, but he was doing all the stuff that he would do with Humanities magnet students. He was grilling kids. He was very hard on them. He would come in and say, like, you black kids, you're never going to earn as much money as white kids do, and you're going to, no matter what education level you achieve, you're still going to be an inferior member of the society, and it was taken the wrong way. the students did not understand that he was pushing buttons, that he was not telling them they were going to be failures, that he was trying to inspire them to not let that happen. And that's when things got out of hand. The parent group that was formed to come after him, those were not Humanities magnet parents.
Now, the first round, it wasn't really parents so much, it was teachers. So the 86 version of this, which is the initial one, it was teachers who went after us. And they wanted us fired. They thought we had some secret racist agenda to destroy the self-esteem of black children. We eventually kind of won it. And we won it essentially by a group of parents going to the principal and saying, if you don't stop this, we're going to pull our kids out of the Humanities magnet, and this is when the Music Academy was starting. And the last thing Music Academy needed was to have a race scandal in the magnet while they're trying to do their initial recruitment and development. So the forces worked the other way, and the principal got off our back and told these teachers to stop. Basically, the principal had said, if you can get the goods on them, so I can fire them, go find the goods. So they were going after us for months. And then when the politics of it changed, these people, teachers said, don't stop it. So here you can see this big divide of the faculty. Big magnet is racist, look at these two racist teachers, they're doing all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, our students are completely have the opposite position on this, almost all of them. So that background is there. Ramp it up to what happens in '98. It's actually a follow-on to that. It has connections to that. So that's teachers and some parents. But that's actually a much larger issue that I was being racist. Things like the music they play, or why is the jazz band all white? But the point is that this was still part of the politics of the day. And Kaplan was, a target of this. Here was this guy, this notorious racist, and he's doing these things to his kids, and kids who were upset with it, and there were faculty who were playing into that a little bit, and it was more of an attack, a general attack on the magnets themselves. People took different sides, but once again, our students pretty much lined up, humanities students anyway, were completely lined up behind us. So the people who actually had us as teachers and knew us, that was a different story than the people who were going after us. So what does his personality have to do with that? His approach to teaching it was probably more effective because it was more emotionally engaging. It was also more risky because it was emotionally engaging. And so his lack of caution was part of it. That passion was on his sleeve, was out there, was more effective in engaging students than what I was willing to do and felt comfortable with. And so he became the target. But more broadly speaking, almost the entire Humanities magnet and Music Academy institutionally was a target. So we were the faces, the bullseye and the target. Everyone else was the part of the target too. Alan's attitude is he wanted to be on the down low as much as possible. So he's on the down low, and I'm pushing the public side of this, which gets to be how he met Aaron.
I grew up in, South Central LA, kind of near the Inglewood border, near Century and Western. It was a very pleasant neighborhood, but I didn't see white people until I was about 12. It was very isolated, and I knew about them. But LA was very, very separate, very, very segregated. So my parents were from the South, so I grew up hearing that, stories about that and how LA was better, but in a way not a lot better than what they experienced. So, when I got on with this newspaper that I worked for, it was called Accent LA. We just covered a lot of news and issues in not just black communities, but a lot of different communities. And that's how I got involved with writing and also covering, places that I was interested in covering. So I always had this idea that I wanted to, kind of expand the narrative of LA, which seemed really, too narrow, I think. The story came to him. There's all this stuff going on in Hamilton. Actually, Hamilton had been in the LA Times, had been in the news about this kind of controversy going on that was racial, and there was a Mr. Kaplan involved and a Mr. Baton, but I read the Times stories and I was still confused about what was going on. And my friend Howard had gotten a call from, I think it was Mr. Baton.
I'm going to these various journalists, and Erin's one of them. And Erin, I had this interview with, and I thought this is really, going to be a good person, this smart lady who knows what's going on. I didn't know she was talking to the other side, but so I remember calling Alan. I said, "You got to talk to her." He didn't want to talk to anybody. He talked to no journalist, except for in a demonstration, some TV people. So I remember spending an hour pacing around the room I was in, yelling at him on the phone, "You've got to talk to her." But finally, he agrees to do it.
When I first talked to him on the phone, and he absolutely did not want to talk to me. He was avoiding the press. He was very, very, he let Greg do all the talking, Mr. Bateman. And so he was, when I talked to him on the phone, I finally got him on the phone. He was willing to talk on the phone. And he told me right away, "I don't want to talk to you. I really don't want to talk to the press." And he actually said to me, "I don't want to talk to any black people." Oh. So I said, well, because they were after him, I said, well, I persuaded him that we really should meet. Somehow I persuaded him to meet with me. And he said, okay, but I had to go to his house. He lives in the valley. And I said, great, I'll come over on Sunday. I don't want him to change his mind because he seemed really, really reluctant. So I actually met him at his house in Encino on a Sunday. It took a little while to open up, but he was never, from the beginning, he didn't put on a face, he didn't try to impress me, he didn't try to give me a line, he was sort of feeling me out. And I think as he got more comfortable talking to me, he just started talking about his own flaws, which is a very dangerous thing to do as a reporter. He started saying, yeah, I didn't do everything right. He said, I probably said some things in the past that were offensive to people. He said, but he insisted that his heart was in the right place. And he said to me that he was harder on a lot of black students. He said, because I know where they're headed. I know what they're up against. I kind of understood that he was teaching to, unlike a lot of teachers who kind of teach to the really good students in the front of the room, he talked to the students in the back of the room.
Yeah.
He brought them forward. And I don't know how he did this with such big classes, public school, it's hard to do, but I realized he really included everybody, and everybody learned from this arrangement. But he said that, there are things that he said, I was pushing the line, I was pushing the envelope on purpose, I was walking that line. And I realized too, he was a guy who liked to be provocative. He could have probably backed down and kind of made this whole thing go away, but he didn't, that wasn't him. He also had, a lot of fight in him, and he just was kind of very stubborn too. And there were things he could have been more diplomatic and probably, but it wasn't in him.
Yeah.
So we had this really ironic situation where he wasn't backing down, the parents weren't backing down, and they really were on the same page. Because the parents said they wanted the best education for their kids, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's what he was doing. I remember I asked the parents, why don't you, if you have all these issues, have you talked to Mr. Kaplan? Have you reached out to him? Oh no, we're not going to talk to him. I said, why not? They said, well, you wouldn't talk to Bull Connor, would you? You wouldn't talk to David Duke. I thought, no, I really wouldn't talk to those guys, but wow, you really think he's that? They really built him up as this horrible guy. And they had never talked to him. And I thought, I started to not trust them. I started to realize they had an agenda. While I agreed with a lot of the points they were making, I didn't understand why they were demonizing just him. I really think it came down to the fact he was a white guy teaching in a very in-your-face way about American history, about slavery, and they had never experienced it, and it made them nervous. So I thought I was going to do the best I could to fill in that gap, to kind of, just illuminate this kind of terrible irony. And when I left his house that day, I was pretty convinced at the end of 3 hours, because I was there for a long time. I was pretty convinced he was not David Duke. He was not a racist. He was a complicated guy. He was sort of, he probably had lost his temper or said some things that were not, politically correct. But I really felt he was a good teacher, and that he was making this big difference.
We're gonna dance to Marvin Gaye. What's going on? Okay. What? Not the unit. And that's a requirement in this class. Okay. Now you can. Come on. No, just come this way. You can dance. Come on. It's a Latino thing. And dance your butts down to the Heartland's class and ask what unit and say, we're supposed to know and we don't. It's not okay. That could have been a test.
Alan was also obviously a big practical joker. So my wife and I decided at the time that maybe we should try and hook them up. So we invited them both over for dinner. And they were already hooked up. But they pretended as if they weren't the entire time.
The first time we went out, he was so nervous that we would run into somebody that I knew who who would not appreciate me going out with him. He was looking out for me. So we went out the first time. We didn't go anywhere. We were going to go to dinner. He goes, no, we can't go to dinner because somebody, might see us and think less of you. He told me that I have a reputation to protect. I'm a black writer, and what if my black friends don't like you? Don't worry about my black friends. Let me worry about that. But he was very, very concerned about that. We have the same, I guess you could say politics, but I just think that, look, all I was expecting was to get a story. I really wasn't expecting to like him. I mean, he sounded really interesting, but I didn't expect to end up marrying him. But he's very charismatic. He's very, very honest, and it's very disarming. It's very charming. He also was kind of spent a lot of time by himself, so we had that in common. We actually had a lot of heated discussions. He wanted to challenge me a lot. Sometimes I felt he was treating me like a student. He was asking me, why do you believe what you think? And sometimes I tell him, leave me alone. I'm not one of your students. But we went back and forth a lot about just a lot of stuff, and it never rested. We never. I think when I wrote this, I wrote about how we met. I wrote a story about it, and I think people might think, because I married him and he married me, that all of our racial problems were solved. It was not at all true. A lot of them came to the fore, and we clashed a lot. We had a lot in common, but we never stopped the discussion. We were always having a discussion about what did things mean, why were things happening. We had a lot of discussion about Obama. We had a lot of discussion about just everything, and we didn't always agree. I think I just basically had more hope in the future than he did. He kind of thought the American political system had gone to hell, and he's probably right. But, I was a little more hopeful than he was. And so he'd ask me, well, why do you think that? Why do you believe that? I think he was glad that, when Obama got elected, everything he'd been teaching about history, about American racism, was right there in the open. He was like, see, I was right. I've been teaching this for years. He'd always say, I've been teaching this for years, and, I'm vindicated, I'm justified. But then, didn't give him much hope. So, but we had a lot in common politically, but we also were different people, and we, were raised in different ways. And so, I don't know, we always just had things to work out.
He was pretty much out there riding on two wheels or putting a tape in another teacher's tape machine that can't operate the machine, or, teaching the way he did, bringing up the topics that he brought up. By going into focusing a lot on, let's say, issues of racism and issues of class and issues of economic structure and capitalism's production of these outcomes. That was pretty radical because the normal way of behaving was don't do anything controversial. I remember when we had the condom ad in the Weltanschauung in the beginning, basically said, condoms are good for preventing STDs and pregnancy. It was a nice little friendly cartoon. Principal wouldn't let us publish. And the principal said, I said, what's wrong with this? She said, it's controversial. And to me, that was the whole point. You wanted to go at things that were controversial. You wanted to pick those topics because they're controversial. That she was saying, like, it was obvious it's controversial. Well, interesting about that is a couple years later, we were giving out condoms, and, teachers were signing up to give instructions on, how to put a banana in a condom, and, things changed in a couple of years, like, radically, but we couldn't do it. So here we were, And we basically been licensed by the previous principal to go after controversy, to be qualitatively different. And we were in a world that, in some sense, some people appreciated it, were drawn to it, and many other people thought, you can't do that. And people would say, why can't I do this? It's hurtful. Well, my speech is stopped because it's hurtful to you. And I'm not talking about calling someone a racial epithet. It could be something that's just having a political opinion. Having an opinion that maybe is held by most Americans, and somehow you can't voice it because, not points of view that necessarily we had, but a student had or something like that. It was that kind of a very closed-in kind of world that had come out of, the kind of more authoritarian 50s and 60s and 70s, and the people who started teaching and were sort of in that mentality were still teaching, and the world was changing around them, and we were sort of like in this new wave of completely looking at it differently, and so it was, it was a feedback loop between us. It was a feedback loop between us, each other, our students. We get parents who come in and say, great, there was all this stuff going on. And, as I said, that stopped after a while. And Alan was looked at as, I think, in many cases, a problem child who would get into trouble. But we had to put up with him because, you know what he's like. And I was looked at as basically a pain in the ass that we should shut up and go away because, he fights with us. We were such golden boys in the mid-'80s that we would get picked to do things. And we were like, what? They picked us? Like they had this thing called Junior Statesman of America. And it was this was this club we had, with this class that was so great. So we said, okay, we've got this thing, and what it is you do, it's about volunteerism. It's actually a Reagan stick. And so the whole class, all 60 of them, whatever, joined. They had like the best chapter ever and things like that. The same thing happened with JSA. So they needed some teachers to run it, so they came to us. So you can run this, And we're like, we're not the kind of people you pick for this kind of stuff. I kind of kept up with my activism, and he stayed pretty much in the background. I kept still bringing him articles, we still talked about what's going on, but there was less intensity or immediacy to it. I think to some degree, as we got into after 2005, 2007, something like that, we kind of drifted apart. We just saw less of each other. We saw each other socially a lot more like in the 80s. We were like two young guys who'd go to a bar or something like that. And I was just amazed at how talented he was at meeting women. He had that gift of gab and that just honest, relaxed thing, So we kind of more and more had lives that are socially more separate. And I would get in various little battles, in my activism. And he was pretty much on the sidelines. And a couple of times I was a little pissed off at him. That, when I could have used his support, it was sometimes a little late coming. It eventually would come, but it wouldn't be that obvious right away. And I think as we get into, after 2009, 10, we start to get to be old men. And we start to slow down. And we start to forget things more. And I responded by trying to become more organized, and he didn't. So, we had very different styles that led to very different kinds of teaching lives, I think. He started questioning himself and his ability in the last 3-4 years as a part of that. And I was kind of watching it go on, and I thought he was becoming kind of obsessive about, Look, you get older, you get forgetful. It doesn't mean you have Alzheimer's. You get older, you got short patience or something like that. It doesn't mean you've got ADD. It just doesn't. It just what happens to you when you're not just your body, but your brain is starting. Stuff. You, in some ways, may be better at what you do than you've ever been. But there's another level where you're not. So when we would, as young teachers, put in huge amounts of hours sometimes, we physically couldn't do that anymore.
There is an element of sadness to Alan Kaplan, I do have to say. he was just, he was amazing, you know, but then he was also like incredibly inept at some of the nuts and bolts of teaching, like taking roll. He was very bad at taking roll. A lot of times he would just like make it up at the end of the semester. He would take attendance and he'd say, well, I'll mark him absent there. And I saw him doing that sometimes. He did not know how to proctor standardized tests. He was like when, here's an Alan Kaplan story for you. It was, I don't remember which standardized test it was. They've had so many different names, but I think it was during the time when they were called CSTs. It wasn't that long ago. Every so often, we'd get to the end of the testing time, and they would come on the PA and say, like, we're extending the bell for 15 more minutes because one of the testing rooms got a late start and was not done yet. And they always knew it was Kaplan. And I remember this one time we were walking down to the end of the hall to go to the bathroom, and it was finally all over, and Dr. Victor and I were actually walking past this room, and Alan was coming out, and we said, it was you, wasn't it, that was late, that ran overtime? And he said, yeah. And we said, what happened? You know, don't you like, he said, I just got the timing wrong. And I said, and Dr. Victor said, well, you know, didn't you read the directions? And he looked at us and he went, there were directions? And he had this way of like, with him, you never knew if he was joking or if he really did not know that there was a manual that you had to read. You're never sure. Sometimes there's, oh, he was just joking about that. He said there were directions. That was something that's fairly typical of him too. That I think all those aspects of the profession bothered him a lot. He didn't want to do them anymore. His teaching didn't change really. His relationship with the profession changed, you know, near the end of his career/life. Ended up coinciding. I started to get the feeling that he was pulling away from the profession itself. A lot of it had to do with the direction education is going, especially the integration of technology into the classroom. He was totally dysfunctional when it came to operating technology. He barely knew how to turn his computer on. I have these memories of walking past his room, like when we had to submit grades, and he would just be sitting there staring at his computer, not entering anything, just staring at it like it was beyond him. He didn't get it. He didn't want to do it. I felt that he was going to retire very soon. As soon as he was eligible for retirement, he would have left the profession. Not because he didn't love teaching, but because he couldn't deal with what this asks you to do every day now.
Alan would say, I can't teach an AP class, I'm incompetent. That's bullshit. He would probably make a brilliant AP teacher. He didn't want to, because he didn't believe in it. I didn't want to. I don't believe in it. So it wasn't a question whether you could do it or not. It's a question of this is wrong. A test-based curriculum is basically wrong. I would do more to cater to it. He'd do nothing whatsoever to deal with it. I would feel some sense, well, I got to deal with this test, and I got to pretend I'm doing something. You know, he would not have anything to do with it. In that sense, he's actually kind of more principled, not out of some constructed thinking about being principled. His reaction's different. So we found we had an opportunity. When we first started, we were both in the office of the principal. His second year, which his first year was like lost, I don't know what happened. So his second year, we're both starting at the same time. And the principal's basically saying, what your job is to be qualitatively different. Don't give us the same stuff. You know, you can't, and this is a very smart, this is Josephine Menace, very, people don't, I think, understand, remember anymore anyway, but understand how bright she was. Basically, you want to create something that's different. You've got to be, in fact, different. If you want to have a successful magnet and draw people to it, they have to have a program that's different. You can't do the same thing. You can't even do the same thing well. You've got to do something that's totally different. And that was like license to kill for us. It's like, we've got died and gone to heaven. Everything we do is going to be about doing it different. The curriculum content, the way we taught, the way we constructed lessons, the way we did everything. I don't mean like where we're going to start like, putting pillows on the floor and singing Kumbaya. I don't mean that kind of different, you know. I meant different about content and energy and what we would talk about and why we would talk about it. And then to the extent that we were part of shaping an image of the Humanities Magnet, we were attracted to some other teachers to be part of this. I'll give you kind of a rundown because I'm not working anymore. When I started the Weltanschauung, it was a very different world here, very different idea. People were in it because they wanted to produce a journal, wanted to say something, wanted to create something. In the last 4 or 5 years, it was the same old, I need something to put on my transcript to get into a better school. I'll put out one issue. I haven't got time for the rest of this. I'm not interested. And it's all about teenage angst, and it's not political, it's not about anything controversial. It's just, you know, I finally, 2 years ago, I just said, I'm done. Alan probably thought of himself as a failure. He knew he had a big enough ego to know how good he was most of his career, and to have a kind of arrogance and sense of superiority, especially moral superiority over colleagues and so forth, although he was pretty subtle about it, but I knew it was definitely there. You know, if you think of most of the adults you know, and you'll probably have your own reflections on this eventually. What did you think you wanted to be when you were a kid? You know, where did you think you were going? How great were you going to be? And then life gets in the way, and you end up maybe doing something really great, but it isn't the same thing you thought it would be.
He always talked about wanting to reach a broader audience. He once said to me, you know, I'm too big for the room. That was the term he used. He wanted more people to know what he was doing and what he was talking about. He wanted a wider audience. He didn't quite know how to accomplish that. He thought maybe it would be through writing, but he never really dedicated himself that strenuously to writing his ideas down. But yeah, he wanted to move on. He wanted to be more than just a high school history teacher, but he didn't know how to do it. There was a part of him that did feel inferior, like maybe he wasn't good enough. So he had a lot of self-consciousness about that, and a lot of, he defeated himself in some ways.
So I think for Alan, teaching was something he could do well, something he could in some ways do easily. But it wasn't satisfying his need for status, his need to be liked, his need for recognition. So as to what the bigger agenda was, I think with really anybody, the bigger agenda is this: you're doing something you think is valuable because it makes you happy, or because it's helping somebody. And those aren't the same thing. You might be helping somebody, but that might be a side effect of what you're doing. So here you had this brilliant man who could exercise his brilliance, not as a college professor, i.e., here's the failure part, right? But as a high school teacher. Teach way above the expected level intellectually. Fits into some of the arrogance, right? And do it very well. But was that because he said, I want to help children? Yes, he liked helping children. Yes, he was emotionally affected by what he could do, but I don't think that was his objective. His objective was trying to do what he could that would make him happy, that would make him feel accomplished. And I say that saying that I'm probably not that much different in terms of what I wanted out of it. And, you know, he got several degrees. And he tried to, you know, he spent a long time being a counselor for wife beaters. You know, he tried other things, but this is where he ended up. And so the kind of tragedy of it is when our bodies when age starts to cause us to come up short. And I'm not going to say this about every teacher who gets old, because we have different styles. Some teachers, you can't notice it's a difference. but for he, and I'm certainly, I think I understand it because it's the same thing as me. When you're getting old and you're slowing down, you don't have that power you used to have. It's really kind of tragic. Now what do you have? You have a feeling of failure, a feeling of coming up short, a feeling of incompetency. I mean, losing papers and a roll book and, you know, what do they expect of us? They expect of us to take accurate roll and have 2 assignments a week that get graded somehow and get recorded in the book and turned back. There's no real expectation of our intellectual acumen, of ability to do things or know things. It's nice, you know, it doesn't have much to do with getting or keeping the job. There's very low expectations of what we're actually able to do in this job. So to find yourself in that sense where you think you're that person now is like the minimal, getting to the minimal, not recognizing that that's not really true. Because your students know that's not true. You know, your colleagues mostly don't know that it's not true. Because they get this outside surface, that, you know, what happened to the papers, you know. And so a lot of the conversations I had with him in that last year or two were short ones about how he felt he was in trouble and they were going to fire him and that sort of thing. And I kept saying, no, I don't think so. You know, you might get written up, you know, look at you badly, but, you know, that's not what's going to happen. But he really, I think he was internalizing what he thought were his limitations. So to kind of make more of a psychological picture of this, is that here is a person who didn't come to teaching because it was a calling, didn't come as a missionary, you know, to do good works, came because it made sense at a time and is something you can do well and something you get a thrill in doing when you do it well. And for him to do it well is what he did in the classroom, not what he did grading papers, not what he did organizing a lesson. It was that stand-up performance. That's what he did well. That's what gave him a kick. And then after all that, that's the feedback. And then you start to feel you're losing it. And you're not recognized the way you used to be. In other words, when it was the 80s and 90s, he and I got a big ego, and I think some of the other teachers here too as well, got a big ego kick out of how highly we were regarded. By the time you get to the 2000s, we're pretty much also mans. We're even looked down on by some. So, you know, the fall is an arc emotionally to this career. And it hit him a lot harder than it hit me.
We went together on a tour of the Fender Guitar Factory down in Corona, and that's something I had the opportunity to do. And I was told I could bring somebody with me, and I thought, who better than Alan Kaplan, because he, you know, collected guitars. He loved guitars. They were works of art to him. And we went into the custom shop where they have the guys that make specialty guitars that are commissioned by famous rock stars. And we saw this one guy working on a guitar, and Kaplan asked, like, who you're making that guitar for? And the guy said, Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. And I'd never seen Kaplan like this before, this very gruff guy. He just melted. He said, can I touch that? And he just went over and he touched the neck, and he said, Keith Richards is going to play this guitar. And he said, can I just stand here for a while and watch you work on it? And that soft side of Alan Kaplan was something that I've always treasured. He was just blown away that he was standing in a room where a guy was making a guitar for Keith Richards, who was going to play it on a stage one day.
He liked camping, but he would never go camping himself. So several times I roped him into driving me up to some place to start a bike ride. There'd be other people there. So we'd get there, and this is when we were pretty poor, so we would camp. And so we would camp, the bicycle riders at him someplace, and he'd have a great time, you know, being one of the guys and camping and the whole thing, but he'd never do it otherwise. So, you know, these little adventures of ours, little experiences that, you know, he was this enormous risk taker, he really was enthusiastic about certain things he did, or he reacted in ways that were very unusual.
He told me once in summer camp he beat up somebody who attacked a black kid who was, he got very impassioned about that. He was very convinced it was wrong, this kind of casual prejudice. And he started looking into it and discovered it was connected to a whole system, to a whole history. It wasn't just casual prejudice. And, it just animated him.
For all of his gruff exterior, he was this extremely intimate, warm man who was a friend to a lot of students in need. Don't forget, he was that teacher when we had students who were struggling with bad home lives. He was the guy they would go talk to. When we had students that were struggling with sobriety, which he himself struggled with. Mr. Kaplan was a recovering alcoholic. He was very open about it. He used to run meetings. And he used to do group therapy with abused women, battered women. So he had a deep and intense connection to people in their suffering. And you could go in and talk to him and you would feel very as dangerous as it felt in his classroom when he was grilling you in the hot seat. You could also go into that classroom, lunch, nutrition, after school, and talk to him and feel very safe. Like here was a guy who was going to help you and protect you. And you could tell him, and you could say anything to Alan Kaplan, and he'd keep your secrets, and he would help you get through your problems.
Sitting in the audience, a strange man. He said, "Are you Alan Kaplan's mother?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "My son is one of his students, and I shall never forget what your son did for my son." This was years ago. And I said, "I'm brilliant. What could I say? I don't know this man. I don't know anything about him. I certainly didn't know anything about what Alan was doing. And I never saw the man again. I have no idea who he was or who his son was. But it gave me an indication of how Alan was reaching out to his students. I had no specifics. I just had an indication that he was reaching out to his students."
He really freed up my teaching, and he gave me the courage to do what I wanted to do. He just said, to hell with it. Get out, go into that classroom and make these kids think, and do whatever you need to do to bring that about. Be outrageous, put on a show. He was really into that. He knew the entertainment value of a classroom can go a long way toward educating young people. I got that from him. I totally agree with him about it. It has paid off. Yeah, his lasting impact on me, though, really is have the courage to be who you are. Don't believe everything you think, which is one of his favorite things to say. To have faith in people that they will come around and understand truth if you can get them to think critically enough about it.
I think with all the other classes, I don't want to name names, but it was intent that you do the work and get an A, and you're a perfect child and you don't act out, and then you go on with your life, and that's how it's supposed to be. But with him, it's he kind of showed you what life is about. It wasn't you do everything perfectly and your life is wonderful and you act like there's nothing wrong.
As the year went on, I started getting better in terms of health and making better decisions with my life. And he commented on it and he asked if I was doing something different because he said I looked better. Or it looked like I was doing something better.
He asked me how it felt being the one black guy in the class. That was hilarious. Then he asked me why I didn't have any chains on that day, neck chains, because every day was a rap video.
He really taught me that it's just okay to be who you are. That's enough. Even though in the end he didn't really seem to believe it himself, but I learned that from him.
We always have the $7,000 SAT review course. That's a monster water. All right, so come on, get real. Dude, we're gonna be a whole nother semester together. You got the rest of your life to bullshit around. And you'll never have anybody more amenable to trying to, give you a chance to live your life. Like, people have lived it throughout most history, they had a life. I'm the one that genuinely, and I'm not my saying, it's my action, I don't want you to have to compromise whatever it is motivating you someplace else's, that A, you get a lower grade than you're capable of. Grades are important. B, you miss an opportunity. I always thought I hated vanilla ice cream until I actually tasted it. I hated it. And it was so long I couldn't tell you why. I can't go back and eat all that vanilla ice cream without consequences. I could just replicate it. Or Latinos. For years. I never thought Latinos ate popcorn. You know, I got the maize thing in the end, but popcorn. Who would think that? And I miss all the times so Latino said, "Hey, would you like some popcorn?" And I said, "Well, that can't be popcorn. That can't be a Latino. No, thank you." Okay, now that's absurd, but that's what I'm discussing. Because I'm trying to make reality fit my mental illness.